and welcome to this podcast for the University of Alabama at Birmingham Research Center of Excellence in Arsenicals. My name is Mina Napavi, and I am a program manager in the UAB School of Public Health. Today we are joined by Dr. Karen Mumy, Director of the Environmental Health Effects Research Laboratory of the Naval Medical Research Unit, Dayton. Dr. Mumy received a Bachelor of Science in Biological Sciences from Michigan Technological University and a doctorate in microbiology from Miami University. Dr. Mumy joined the Naval Health Research Center Environmental Health Effects Detachment at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base as a research microbiologist in 2009. In the fall of 2010, the laboratory became the Environmental Health Effects Research Directorate of the Naval Medical Research Unit, Dayton, where she became the Deputy Director in 2012 and the Director in 2017. She currently leads a team of nearly 50 active duty, civilians, and contractors. Her research efforts focus on deciphering and addressing the health concerns of Department of Defense service members who are exposed to environmental stressors and toxicants. She is here today to talk with me about her work and some of the projects at the Naval Medical Research Unit, Dayton. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
For coming down to Birmingham and joining us here.
Thank you.
So to get us started, can you tell our listeners about the Naval Medical Research Unit, Dayton?
Certainly. So the Naval Medical Research Unit, Dayton, is a relatively new command. So you mentioned earlier, it stood up in the fall of 2010. The Naval Medical Research Unit, Dayton, or NAMR Dayton, as we shorten it to be, it's a little bit less of a mouthful that way, is made up of two science directorates. So there's the Environmental Health Effects Directorate, for which I'm the director of, and then there's also an Aeromedical Research Lab, for which Dr. Rick Arnold is the director of that lab. So between the two science directorates, we make up, and then admin and finance staff, we make up a command of about 150, maybe give or take a few. And we are located on Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. We are one of 8 labs that fall under Navy Medicine Research and Development.
So can you talk a little bit more about the Environmental Health Effects Lab, the area that you were over?
Yeah, the Environmental Health Effects Lab, we also shorten that one since military likes to give very long names and then use acronyms for things.
Yes.
So we lovingly call it EHEL. EHEL has been part of the command since it stood up in 2010, but actually long before that. The lab itself is the Navy's Toxicology Lab. And originally it stood up in the 50s and was located in Bethesda, Maryland. And at the time that it stood up, it was tasked with a broad mission of looking at health effects associated with environmental exposures that sailors would experience. Now, there were a couple things specifically in mind at the time. There had been some unfortunate circumstances of fires aboard aircraft carriers where over 100 sailors had died, and there were questions as to whether they had died from smoke inhalation or whether it was inhalation of some type of toxicant, such as the fumes from burning fuels or coolants and things like that. But then also a very big driver, again, this was back in the 50s, so a very big driver at the time was the fact that we were going to be putting submariners on board of nuclear-powered subs for the first time. So the lab was stood up to address those types of issues, and again, in the late 50s, it was located in Bethesda, Maryland, and then it moved to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in the mid-70s in order to co-locate with the Air Force group that does similar types of work. So all of that is, with regard to looking at occupational and environmental exposures that service members receive and trying to predict or understand the health effects that may occur as a result.
So can you talk a bit about some of those programs in current day as part of EHEL? Is that the correct?
Yeah,
okay.
That is correct, yes.
I did a little bit of digging on the website, and like you mentioned, the Submariner Health program. Can you talk a little bit more about what you were doing right now?
Sure. So submarines are a very interesting environment, and across the the Department of Defense, we have a lot of interesting environments because we have unique ones that are separate from what the public might, typically experience. We'll have situations in tanks, right, and in very unique aircraft. But also within submarines, they're very impressive machines. They're confined spaces, which really is what presents the most challenging part of the environment, is that it's a confined space that you put a lot of people in. All of their activities take place in this confined space, and they stay there.
In this one spot.
In this one spot. And it's not as roomy as a cruise ship or anything like that. It's actually quite small. So all of the activities kind of build up. And so with regard to that, you have unique exposures because, again, small space, buildup of certain types of chemicals in the breathing atmosphere on board submarines. But then one also additional part of our program has been the fact that in 2010, for the United States, Congress passed legislature that would put females aboard submarines for the first time. Now, other countries had done it, but the United States had not.
Wow.
So just within the last 10 years have we been seeing females go on board submarines. And that's significant because all of the health parameters that were looked at prior to that time were all for healthy young males.
Okay.
So we needed to relook, right, in order to make sure that we were properly protecting females.
Another project that I did a little bit of digging before our talk this morning was about the Aviation Environment Program. So can you talk a little bit about that, around toxicity of jet fuels or noise? Just share a little bit about what's going on there.
Sure. The aviation environment is also something that is unique, or the circumstances of it are unique to the military, because it is a different situation than commercial airlines to some extent. There are a lot of similarities, but then there are also a lot of differences. We do have a very high performance aircraft, and we're putting a person in it. And in some degree, the engineering has advanced beyond the person, right? But we have fantastically trained pilots, and an air crew, and we want to make sure that we are keeping them safe. So we do have to take a look at all the types of things that they are exposed to, whether it's in the cockpit or on their way to the cockpit or around the cockpit. Right. And there are, you can imagine, many types of chemicals or gases that would exist, and you'd expect them to be there, right? Certainly you want your aircraft to fly, so it's going to have fuel.
You need that,
yes,
right?
It's going to have jet fuel, and that jet fuel is a mixture of hundreds of compounds. And some of them, we know aren't the best. Some of them are pretty innocuous, but all of them really are present in very, very low amounts because they're all put together. So one of the things that we have looked at a lot in the last number of years have been looking at the effects of exposure to the jet fuels, and there are different types. They're called jet propulsion fuels, or JPs. There are a number of different types, and we've had different studies looking at different types. The Navy uses one type, and the Air Force uses a different type. But then beyond that, there had previously been a push for alternative fuels, so looking at jet fuels that had come from biosources to try to get away from the conventional types of fuels that relied on oil.
Right.
So we look at general health effects associated with jet fuel exposure, but then also a very unique program has been looking at a combination of jet fuel and sound or noise. So noise-induced hearing injury is a very big issue,
right,
for not only active duty population, but also the veterans. So we've been trying to understand how noise contributes to hearing injury, and then when you put different types of chemicals together on top of noise, some of which are known to be ototoxic or cause potential hearing injury themselves if in the right concentration. We've been looking at the combinations of those stressors together.
So before we go, are there any other programs or any other things that you would like to share with our listeners? Or
yeah, we have a very wide breadth. Our mission is pretty wide as far as looking at environmental health exposures for Navy sailors, submariners, air crew. We have active projects in military women's health and also looking at legacy issues such as Gulf War illness.
Okay.
I guess the last thing that I would like to mention, I started by saying that we are one of 8 labs, so we are part of the Navy Medicine Research and Development Enterprise, and we fall under Navy Medicine, which is under the Bureau of Medicine and Surgery for the Navy. So we're at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and we're happy to collaborate, and we love to hear from people because that's what we're there for.
Well, this has been very informative for me, and I know for our listeners. So thank you so much for being here and for taking time out of your morning to talk with me.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you for listening. Please tune in next time for another episode from the UAB Research Center of Excellence in Arsenicals.